throughout my life, and even now, I find myself faced with these contradictory philosophies. Follow passion, not money, and money follows passion. And then it's like, no. And then you have people like Scott Galloway, who I respect, and it's like, follow your talent, not your passion, and then make the best of it. Then there's coming to grips with reality in your situation and providing for a family. But really, honestly, man, I just bet on myself. I knew for a fact that I could do it. It was a gamble, really, man.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Kerry Kite. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post-9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills.
Episode 102 features Tate, a Marine Corps veteran and a copywriter at PETERMAYER, a creative-led integrated marketing agency in New Orleans.
Welcome. This is Veteran Made.
This episode is brought to you by GoPills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right, cool. We are live. Good afternoon. Tate, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thanks for having me, man.
No doubt. I'm excited. Super excited to connect with you. I guess like almost a year ago, six or 9 months ago now. It was Veterans Day last year. We were both featured in an article through Ad Age or Ad Week, like one of those trade publications there for advertising. And I was just stoked to get connected to some other veterans in advertising. Obviously, that's something I've been working in for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and obviously something that I've been trying to connect with more folks. So I'm super glad to have come across you through that article, and glad to have you on the podcast to chat about some stuff.
Likewise, man. That was my introduction to your podcast and all your guests and what you're doing with Veteran Made and stuff. So awesome, man. I'm glad to be here.
Sweet, man. Cool. So if you could just give everybody a brief primer on kind of like who you are, where and when you served, briefly, and then I'll jump into some questions from there.
All right. I guess the quickest rundown. I served in the Marine Corps from 2009 to 2013. I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan. When I got out, I kind of hopped around for a bit. I did everything from door-to-door sales to the healthcare field. I tried multiple different types of education, and I always went back to writing. And then as I discovered like copywriting as a lucrative field, I started going there. I went to the Creative Circus in Atlanta, which no longer exists. After about a year there, where I met my wife, I left the circus to take a job at PETERMAYER, where I currently reside.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to get into that transition, both into Creative Circus and then from Creative Circus to PETERMAYER. But before we get into that, when did you start writing? Did you write before you joined the Marine Corps? Did you write while you were in the Marine Corps? You mentioned kind of like discovering or rediscovering writing after you got out.
Yeah, no, I always wanted to write screenplays. I think from the time my mom still has a paper I wrote like in 2nd grade where I was talking about Jurassic Park. I wanted to write screenplays. I wanted to be a movie writer. And just the idea of the creative process, just discovering at a young age, like, somebody writes this shit, so. Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously pretty similar to my childhood too. Like I started wanting to be an actor, and then in high school, I discovered the behind the scenes, making of documentaries on the DVDs and the special features. And I was like that nerd who would buy DVDs. I mean, I still buy Blu-rays and my wife still makes fun of me, but I would like buy the DVDs not just so that I could watch the movie, but so I could watch the special features and kind of figure out the behind the scenes. And once I learned that, yeah, people actually wrote these movies. It's not just a director, an auteur who's like, oh, point the camera here and do it this way. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it, on the page before you even get there. That's when my interest turned from in front of the camera to behind the camera and writing. So similar. Did you write it all while you were in the Marine Corps?
I did. Yeah, I did. Honestly, at that point in my life, I was going through, you know how like, I mean, because you're a writer, at heart, you go through phases where you try out all the different mediums. Like, when you're a kid, it's like poetry and like little short stories, and you kind of just explore. Yeah, when I was in, I always tried to like recount my experiences in the best way I could, and it's kind of where I started learning to write honestly, because everything I wrote was like really sugar coated, and like, I wasn't being honest with my experiences of the military. Like I was writing, like it's almost like everything I wrote, like all the like, thinly veiled stories were based on what the media presented as Marines, soldiers, stuff like that. Because like you watch these movies, and it's like you see these like sergeants that are like these 45-year-old grizzled like tough men, and it's like most of the times these are like 19 or 20-year-old boys, and the reality is a lot harsher, a lot darker. I mean, and there's like beautiful camaraderie like weaved in it, and that's, I guess, the military is where I learned to start crafting my voice and being honest and not worrying about what else was surrounding me like in that space.
So what were you writing when you were in the military? Was it poetry? Was it like personal essay, memoir style? Were you writing fiction? Like what was it?
I was doing so like I was deeply inspired by like Slaughterhouse-Five by Vonnegut. I didn't read that actually. Like I had read some Vonnegut in high school, and was honestly I was like, whatever with this guy. I wasn't like a huge like I know everybody loves him in high school, but it was when I read Slaughterhouse-Five after my first deployment, I was like, this is a brilliant piece of work. This isn't overhyped. Just the way he kind of like captured PTSD, and the like he made this like beautiful anti-war book, but he also made like a satire and a like very compelling science fiction thing that's a meditation on time, and just the way he was able to like weave in those darker themes. So I was inspired by that. So I was always trying to like run before I even crawled, So I was like, before I was even trying to put out short stories or even like self-publishing little like articles or posts online, like I was like, I'm going straight for a memoir or a novel, So
Yeah, I feel you. I started. I'm working on like on the personal writing side of things. I'm working on like a handful of different things outside of work right now. And as you were just talking, it got me thinking about like, because I got about halfway through a memoir manuscript, which I'm still working on. I'm not going to quit and drop it, but getting halfway through that unlocked some of these other avenues for me, like through poetry. I started taking some notes on poems, and so now I'm trying my hand at poetry. And then there's this kind of like shorter form memoir style, like book that I'm also working on. And then through all of that, I started to see things more cinematically again as like through work. And so then I started working on another screenplay. Like I haven't written a feature screenplay in, about 5 years. So now I'm writing one again. I actually wrote 2 pages this morning. And so it's like the output across all the different media. I think it's dangerous, right? Because then you don't ever finish anything if you're not actually kind of like going through the process of finishing things. But it is good if we can figure out how to harness it to work across different media, even within just the writing space.
Yeah, 100%. That's, it's like, I really love writing these personal like passion projects of mine. But the more I study like the different forms of copywriting, like, you learn like there's this real, like, there's just as much science to it as there is art, and just kind of like seeing like the visual kind of hierarchy and psychology of like online writing, like the way you like break things up, keep things real short, like practicing brevity, bolding things here, making it skimmable, because, there's very few people who are like actually sitting down and actually consuming a novel. Like it's such an active thing now. So like learning how to write, based on the way people are consuming written content and the way it's like evolved. To me, that's the psychology of reading and writing. Sometimes to me is really fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and it's easy to be cynical about it, right? Like, oh, people skim these days and people only read short form, people only do this. Well, I mean, a couple things, like if you're going to drive culture and create culture, you also do need to participate within culture, right? And
100%.
so if people are consuming, like right now we are watching in real time, everybody went from long form content, TV commercials, those very classic advertising campaigns, to TikTokifying everything, right? Everything's got to be choppy. Everything's got to be quote unquote cheaply produced. Everything has to be UGC, DIY. Everything has to be jump cuts, and it shouldn't have too much polish to it. To now, we're actually watching that happen where people are like, okay, I've had enough of that. I want to go back to this mid form, long form content across podcasts. Joe Rogan's the best example. Somebody who runs 4-hour podcasts, almost daily, and people are either sitting down and watching the whole thing on YouTube, or they're watching 20-minute clips on YouTube, or listening, kind of while they go about their day. So,
I mean, binge watching series, like people who binge watch, like people will sit and watch 12 hours of a show and be like, I just, it's crazy. It's very like, it's a very polarized thing. So there's no right answer, but everybody wants to be the right these days. It's like short form is in, and it's like, no, long form is in. It's like, maybe different people like different shit.
Yeah. And maybe you just, maybe on the creator side, on the creative side, diversify your output, test and learn, figure out like how you can work across these different, ways in to writing, whether it's a campaign for advertising or flash fiction or, personal memoir, personal essay, memoir, whatever it might be. So how did your journey from being, kind of a writer who was inspired while you were in the military, what was that initial transition like for you out of the Marine Corps? Why did you not jump right into writing? How did you discover copywriting as an opportunity, as an option for you when you separated?
So I didn't jump straight in. There was actually probably an 8-year period. So it's like really kind of based on my socioeconomic class, like where I grew up in like fairly impoverished area. So those kind of options weren't always presented. So it was like, you can be a truck driver, or, you could be a nurse, what I mean? There's never like, you could do anything. You could be a doctor. It was like very like vocational technical school. It's like, here's 8 things you could do because you went to this high school in this area and have these parents. So copywriting was, I always knew somebody had to write commercials, but like I only knew this thinly veiled ad exec that you see on, movies all the time. It's just this very vague job. So I had no idea that writing could be lucrative unless you were, you hit the lottery to become, a best-selling author or what have you. But believe it or not, it was a book by a veteran author, the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I mean that, like, I've read a lot of books, you know what I mean? And like, there's a lot of books everywhere. I'm like, I love that. And I always thought it was corny to be like, this book changed my life. That book legitimately changed my life. I truly felt like I was being spoken to. And just tiny little nuggets in that book where he's like, the best training I ever got on writing was when I was a copywriter at an ad agency. And like, he did it for 2 years, and it was just like kind of an afterthought, just something he mentioned. I started searching. I was like, I should get into copywriting. And the more I learned about it, the more I like tried to pursue it on my own. And I eventually landed on the Creative Circus's website.
I'm glad you bring up Pressfield. He comes up a lot on this show. I've got a stack of all of his books from his most recent memoir, Government Cheese.
Yeah, I was gonna say I haven't read Government Cheese yet.
It's good. I'm not done with it. I'm about 3/4 of the way done with it. It's good. War of Art, Turning Pro, Do the Work, Warrior Ethos, Authentic Swing. Nobody wants to read your shit. Put your ass where your heart wants to be. Like all of them, man. Like I just reread War of Art again for probably the 25th time about like a month ago, 2 months ago.
You have to. It's a reminder. It's a constant. It's like a philosophy. It's like it's a guidebook when you're lost. It just kind of reminds you. And like even if you have it in your head, like seeing the words on the paper, like that book is proof to me why, how profound writing can be in the written word. But
Yeah, it's incredible. He's incredible. So how did you discover Creative Circus?
so I was,
Did you read Pressfield and Google how do I become a copywriter?
yeah, oh yeah, that's where it all started, like how to become a copywriter. And then, you know, what you see online, man. It's like you see some like 19-year-old kid who rented a Lambo and he's like, let me tell you how I started copywriting a month ago and I'm making 170,000 a month right now. And it's like, okay, sure. And then it's like once you filter through all the bullshit and all the fluff out there and you start finding like real answers. I was looking for specific like courses, like which I could afford at the time, which were going to be on like Udemy, and I think Coursera might have been like around at the time, and then free information, of course. But I was going to buy this $3,000 course from AWAI, if you've ever heard of them. Um, and then somebody in this blog post was like, if you want a great education, go to the Creative Circus. And then in parentheses, it said, if you're a rich kid and can afford it. So I was like, Creative Circus. I looked it up. I saw the .edu, and I was like, oh, I have some GI Bill left. It's a 2-year program. And I called. I didn't have an undergrad degree, and I asked if they take me, if they did remote, what have you. And they're like, oh, you have to move here. And my daughter was 5 at the time, and I just kind of, took the risk, the short-term sacrifice for the long-term success, and went down there. And I was out in a year, and I had doubled my earning potential just in that year and a half of school.
So yeah, okay. So before we get to you going there and leaving, like you're describing this is what's great about the internet, right? It's what's great about libraries, and it's what's great about the internet, right? You read, so you discover a book. You discover the book, so you read the book. You read the book, you think about the content that's in the book, and then you're like, well, what do I have at my disposal to figure out how to do what this guy did? You
Mm-hmm.
get on the internet and say, how do I be a copywriter? And you go through all the message boards, Reddit, Coursera, whatever all these other ones are, right? And you go through and you're like, oh, okay, well, there's a path forward here. And you have the GI Bill and all those different things. Like what did that because a lot of people won't do that, right? A lot of people will get out of the military and say, well, I would love to go do this other thing, but you Google search something and it gets overwhelming to look at all the options, right? That's like the benefit of Google is that everything is at your fingertips. The big drawback to Google is everything's at your fingertips. Like humans,
paradox of choice, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Humans are not like, we're not very good. Like we get choice fatigue very, very quickly. So how did you navigate that? Did you experience that? How did you navigate that? Like what were the feelings as you were kind of going through that process and trying to figure out how and where to use, your GI Bill in like one of these kind of creative trade schools?
Oh, that was actually a long road. That was like a year of back and forth where I was like, you get to that point of defeat, and it's sad because you're in your like mid to late 20s when you do that. Like you're like, I guess these are my only options. Like everything seems so close yet so far away. Like, so for me, even just becoming a copywriter didn't seem like a reality, because a lot of people I know now in the industry are like, oh yeah, I met this guy who is a copywriter. I have these friends that I went to school with that worked at the agency. Like I had none of that network. So I was going completely blind. So at the time I was working as a crane mechanic for ridiculously low pay. And I thought about using my GI Bill to like go become an electrician or something, because I'm like, this is reality. Like this is my reality. Like I'm going to make the best of my reality, because this copywriting pipe dream, like you see how it like, society slowly deflates you. It's like, I'm going to be a screenwriter, and then I'm going to do this, and now I'm going to do this. And then you like land in that copywriting area. And then like, it's like, maybe I'm just going to stick to this. But it was a long process. Did I answer?
What made you push through that? Because you're right. You're not wrong. And like, and this is the plight of, I mean, listen, Jordan Peterson has talked about, so many people have talked about this. Like it is so hard to earn a living as a creative, period.
Yeah.
Like don't even take into account the, the Tom Cruises all the way on down. Just like that whole range of superstar, movie star, director, screenwriter, what have you, Shane Black, to junior entry level copywriter at an advertising agency. Like everybody who operates within those parameters, within that range, like it's damn near impossible to earn a living creatively. So you're not wrong that you look at it and you can see the framework. Well, I have ambition and dreams to be, a AAA blockbuster successful screenwriter. And then, okay, well, maybe, okay, I'm not going to do that. So I'll just kind of work a blue collar job. And then, well, there is this other copywriting thing. So if I do that copywriting thing, like I can still kind of scratch that itch. I can still kind of, touch that space. But it is still just, we assign value to these things, and it's not incorrect, but at the same time, it stops a lot of people from plugging themselves in to that system to give themselves the opportunity to operate within that range between, super high and super low. So it's this really interesting, like we give up all of the time before we even give ourselves the opportunity to try something. So I'm curious, like what made you say, I'm going to go try to be a copywriter?
That's tough. That's tough. I'll try to answer it as best as I can, because throughout my life, and even now, I find myself like faced with like these contradictory philosophies. This like, follow passion, not money, and money follows passion. And then it's like, no. And then you have people like Scott Galloway, who like I respect, and it's like, follow your talent, not your passion, and then make the best of it. And like, then there's coming to grips with like reality in your situation and, providing for a family. But really, honestly, man, I just bet on myself. I knew for a fact that I could do it. Like it was a gamble, really, man. It was just me. Like, I think it was like Jim Carrey who said it, like, I could do I could have became that electrician I was talking about, and I could have failed miserably at it. So like, why not fail at something I want to fail at? That's going to scratch that itch.
Yeah, we can very, very easily get caught up in philosophizing over the very human nature of experiencing contradictory thoughts, feelings, and observations.
Mm-hmm.
And we can cut that Gordian knot with action. Just take action, bet on yourself. Like Pressfield says, do the work.
Yeah, dude, that's where it was. Like I need to, and then I found myself like during that period, like when I became a copywriter, like when I was in school, like actually sitting down, working, writing every day, like getting my, writing for an hour, 2 hours every day, setting blocks and like actually doing it, as opposed to like, because before, like I sat there and like, how many books on writing can you read? You know what I mean? Because I've done that. Like it's the biggest form of procrastination. I think it feels like progress. Like it feels like progress, and it's hitting that reward center of your brain, but you're not doing shit like without actually applying it.
That's right. And that's my favorite thing. That's become my favorite thing about advertising, by the way, is when you get a brief from a client and then you turn that brief back around to the client on the agency side of things. Well, then as creatives and as production creatives, we now have a sandbox to play in. Whereas if you're just sitting down to look at the blank page because, well, I've got this idea of a screenplay, let me outline it, or I've got this novel, let me start with an outline. It's so difficult to do because you're just staring at a blank page and you have, back to the Google example, you have all of these opportunities in front of you, like within that blank page. Whereas in advertising, you get a brief, you turn the brief back around, you get approval on the brief, and now you have a sandbox to play in. That's where you create your content.
Dude, putting up the guardrails are nice for a creative person, because it's hard. Like you mentioned earlier, like jumping from thing to thing, like that's something I struggle with a lot. And that's why I love advertising, because it's a very controlled environment, and it's kind of when you have like ADHD and qualities like that, where having trouble focusing. It's nice being able to like complete something, like getting a brief, finishing it. Like you've created something, like the spots out there, like that's it. It's like I made that, and it's like you can sit there and look and like it could have been better 100 times, but the fact that like you did something, you finished it, you solve problems creatively. That's, I mean, I always love the work? No. Do I always feel, do I get imposter syndrome? Do I ever feel like a sellout? Sure. But like, I truly love what I do, and I'm glad. And I'm glad, like it, like you were saying, reading a book, reading the War of Art, like searching for the best books for writers, ultimately led to me breaking like cyclical generational poverty. Now, like I've stepped up a notch, and I hope to continue to climb for my children to have better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, what was it like to get to Creative Circus? You and the family moved to Atlanta. Um, so, what was it like to sit
Well,
down, or did you do
yeah,
it online?
no, I moved to Atlanta. I moved from Pennsylvania to Atlanta, and it was just me. And every weekend I was uh, driving back to see my daughter for a period. Yeah,
What was that like?
it was rough, man. It was tough, and the circus was it was way different than I thought because like I said, I kind of took that leap of faith when I went down there. So all I had been learning about was like, the kind of direct response kind of copywriting, the very much like writing a 5-page sales letter to sell high ticket items. And I thought that's kind of what I'd be learning. And then obviously Creative Circus is more about like high level conceptual brand awareness and perception campaigns. So it was different. It was completely, I thought I prepared myself, which a lot of the fundamentals I learned were like from reading beforehand were great, but the circus was kind of a shock to me, and it felt kind of like an art school, like just all the, like it was a lot of young kids like fresh out of college, a lot of them coming from like top 10 schools. There's like a couple little Ivy Leaguers. I felt out of place, to be honest, man, like completely out of place.
What did you do to push through those feelings?
Um, I just kind of really leaned into my competitive nature and just looked at everything as a friendly and to be fair, sometimes not so friendly kind of competition, just to outwork everybody because a lot of people were coming who already had jobs lined up because, this uncle owned this trailer house, this cousin of mine is an ECD or an account executive at this big agency, and everybody seemed to have like well established networks and connections. And me, I was like, like it's just about that leap of faith and betting on yourself. There were a lot of times where I'm like, man, even if I like finish this school, like I'm not going to be able to uproot and live in these cities like and make like a 50K salary living in New York. You know what I mean? Like my parents aren't paying my bills. But I pushed through, man, and they always said like the work will speak for itself, and I was always receiving a lot of like positive feedback, because the school was very honest. Like if you weren't performing or just not grasping what they were teaching, they would kind of nudge you in out the door a little bit, like maybe try something else.
What was the class structure like? Like, how long was the program supposed to be? And then what were the class structures like? Was it like traditional college, or was it how did it work?
So it was a 2-year program, and it was eight uh, what would it be, 8 10-week quarters. So you'd have a 10-week quarter, 2 weeks off, so for 2 years. And like depending what you go in, they have like you come in the fall, the summer, the spring. I came in the summer, like mid COVID. um, so my class was really small, and it's you're with art, it's just art directors and copywriters. Like they're, you could be in the photography class, the design class, but I was in the ad program, so I'm with copywriters and art directors, and we each have our own like individual courses, but mostly it's kind of simulated ad agency, like right out the gate. It's kind of like a the first 10 weeks is like, this is how it works. This is how it's going to work. These are some fundamentals. And then it's like simulated environment. It's like,
So they'll just give you like, here's a brief.
here's a product, here's a brief. And believe it or not, a lot of times you brief yourself. Like you have to create your own brief. So they teach you a lot of like strategic thinking right out the gate. Yeah, that's about it.
So, what were you like? Were you thinking about what was your mindset going into it in terms of? Because spoiler alert for those listening, right? You end up leaving the program early because you get a job, right? And so that's kind of that's the questions that I'm building towards here. I want to get there, but like along those lines, like what was your mindset going into the program? Was your mindset going in like, I'm just going to soak all this up, I'm going to finish this program and kind of see where I net out? Were you going in with that competitive mindset saying, like, I know I'm going to be putting a portfolio together as I go, and I'm going to send out applications and resumes in this portfolio as I go? Like, how competitive were you? How efficient were you trying to be? How fast were you trying to move? Like, what led, like, walk us towards what led to you ultimately dropping out of the program to go take a job?
So my wife became my partner in school, and yeah, when I went in with that competitive mindset of like, I'm not going to be here the entire 2 years. Like, I'm going to build this portfolio as quickly as I can. My wife, who I met in school, we partnered up, and she was a few quarters ahead of me. So she graduated a year earlier than me, and we had been partners on everything that was in our portfolio essentially. And she was like, they do like a portfolio review, so she was already getting like vetted, and basically PETERMAYER was like looking for a team, and she's like, do you want to leave school and hop on with me? And I was like 100%. So I wasn't even actively applying at that point. I mean, I was prepared to, but I had my portfolio as polished as I wanted it to, as polished as I wanted it to be.
Got it. So like, because your copy was like a part of her portfolio, you just kind of gave her the go ahead, and as she was applying, that's when you hopped on with
Yeah.
her. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So
And so then you kind of followed through on the, your thought was, I'm not going to be here the whole time anyway. So it wasn't a big deal for you to leave. You're like, hell yeah, I want to leave. Because that's the thing I really want to talk about is a lot of times I think that it's changing now, which is good. When I was in the Air Force coming out, it was like, graduate high school, serve for 4 years, use the GI Bill, go to school for 4 years, get out of school, work an internship, work your way up in an organization. I always use the example on the podcast of, my dad's old clients from Ernst & Young. When I finally connected with them on LinkedIn, they had one entry on their link, two on their entry, wherever they went to college, and then Ernst & Young. They worked there for 40 years, right? And so it's not like that anymore, and that's good. But it does mean that there's still this kind of mindset shift that has to take place as people are separating out of the military or getting out of college or what have you. I'm even Stanford, right? Like I've heard Stanford says, try not to graduate from here, because while you're here, if you can find the opportunity to found a startup or to go work on a startup or to go start generating revenue, leave Stanford and go do that, right? There is this cultural shift, this mindset shift happening in culture. So did you receive any sort of pushback either internally or externally with like, oh, I've got to finish this program because then the program doesn't quote unquote count?
no, see, yeah, that's funny you asked, because I did have two teachers at the school that I considered mentors, and one of them was like, if you finish the program, you're going to have a much more polished book, and you're going to be able to compete for much bigger, better jobs. Which, is that true? I don't know. And then I had another one that I respected just as much. It was like, yeah, dude, if you're getting a job offer, that's the point of this school. Like, go. Why would you spend more money here? And I just took that as like, yeah, that's 100% what I'm going to do. Because again, man, I wasn't coasting. Like, a lot of them still had like the college kid mindset, and what it's like to, after the military, you go to school, like you're an adult. You know what I mean? You have responsibilities. You're like, I'm trying to pay bills and get my life underway and build something. I don't have time to like go hang around the bars in Atlanta and be a college kid. Like, and in that point, I may have missed out on some networking opportunities, but
Yeah,
like,
but Sure, but like now you're building networking opportunities at an agency
Yeah.
and with people, you know what I mean? Like you're in it. And that was my biggest struggle. As I look back and reflect, you know, I really did struggle coming out of the military, and I could never quite pinpoint what it was that I struggled with. It wasn't PTS. Like I didn't, you know, experience any sort of TBI, or I didn't, you know, experience any sort of combat or anything like that that would have, you know, created post traumatic stress or anything like that. And so it was always this kind of like this malaise, this like something I could never like quite figure out what it was. But as I look back, as I, you know, 102 episodes into this podcast and working now in a civilian career for almost a decade, I look back and I was like, oh, I was in a hurry because I felt like I was behind and I wanted to bring my skills to bear on the next thing that it was. I wasn't upset that I was in college. I wasn't upset that I was getting an education. I loved the education. I loved studying. I loved studying the craft. I loved writing. I loved getting published. I loved making. I loved doing all those things. But that gap between like doing that academically in a laboratory setting versus doing it where it actually fucking counts, like that gap was the biggest struggle for me. So that's why your story is so compelling to me, because you're like, well, you know, I'm going to school so that I can get a job. So I got a job, so I'm dropping out of school because I don't need the school anymore. I got the job. And us coming from a military background, I'm just going to go get on the job training. It's not like I'm quitting learning. I'm not quitting training. I'm not quitting my education. I'm just going to go get it in a higher impact place.
Yeah, 100%. Dude, you hit the nail on the head right there, because that's how I felt. Like I was 29 going into ad school, and I was like, that was like a fire lit under my ass constantly in my head. I'm like, I'm like behind. Like these kids are 22. By the time they're my age, they're going to be, you know, creative directors, and here I am. Like I'm probably going to get out and have a boss who's my age, which, you know, it happens. I'm, you know, not ageist by any means, but it did give me this feeling of like, fuck, like I am so behind. Like, but then I'm able to look back and I bring a lot of things to the table with that life experience I had that a lot of people don't get just from simply high school to college to ad school. Like I have like a ridiculous amount of life experience that is completely invaluable, and sometimes worth way more than, you know, a degree.
Yeah, it eventually catches up, right? Like you
Yeah.
eventually kind of catch up to it, right? And I think getting out of the military in your 20s, like us, I obviously can't speak for folks who retire. I haven't had that experience, but for those of us that were like in our 20s as we get out, you know, it looks really daunting to think, oh, I'm going to have to report to somebody who's younger than me, who doesn't have as much life experience as I do. It's daunting to look and say, well, they went to a really good college and didn't have to work while they were in college. And so that therefore they had an internship, where nowadays these kids get paid internships, right? Because of some of the laws that are on the books now. And you're looking back, you're like, well, shit, I didn't get any of those things. But like now that we're at the stage of our careers where we are, I look back and I'm so grateful for all of it, because now it's caught up, where my experience has caught up to what I'm able to like project and what I'm able to execute, whether it's with clients or whether it's with colleagues or whether it's with another agency or partner agency, a vendor, whoever it might be. Whereas, you know, late 20s, early 30s, you're kind of like in this weird limbo, no man's land of, well, I've got a ton of experience, but I don't have a ton of industry experience. I'm really confident in my ideas, but I'm also humble enough to know that my ideas might not be the best ones. I don't know how to collaborate yet. Like those are the reps. That's the OJT that you get on the job in our industry.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's sad. I have a lot of veteran friends who are, you know, around my age, and they're, you know, they're kind of where I was like a little less than 10 years ago. They're all like in this like, I don't know what to do. Like it's like you're kind of directionless once you get out. It's like,
Yeah.
even though like they all know deep down what they want to do, it's just like perhaps they don't feel they have that option. They don't bet on themselves. So
Yeah. I mean, it's back to choice fatigue, right? And it's back to this like idea of like, you know, taking action creates new branches on the tree, right? So like if you don't take action, you're just kind of like standing at the base of the tree. If you take action, create a branch, and there's more branches from there. Might not be the perfect action, might not be the perfect branch, it might not be the perfect set of branches you want right now, but you have to take that first step, take that first action in order to then create more opportunities. And I think us coming from the military, where there is a little bit more of a strict hierarchy, and you kind of look at career officers or career senior enlisted, and you're like, man, like you've got it real cush. You just kind of work your way up, and then you stop doing your job, and you start managing and overseeing and supervising, and then you start making political decisions, and then you have political ties, and you start doing all these different things. And it's like we definitely come from that set of experiences where we're able to observe that. Whereas in advertising, advertising is a different beast because it does. In some ways, the hierarchy in advertising is worse than it is in the military because like we don't have enough time and service. You don't have enough. I'll never forget somebody told me that I was like, I wanted to be an agency producer. I left a production company and I wanted to be an agency producer. And I asked somebody who was a mentor of mine at the time for some advice on how to make the leap. And he just straight up looked at me. He's like, you haven't been in this industry long enough. Your book isn't big enough. Like you're not gonna be able to do that. And I was like, wait, excuse me, what? But that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And he's like, yeah, no, like nobody's going to hire you. You have to have X years of time and service, and your portfolio has to be this big with this. I was like, I'm sure there's some truth to that, but my portfolio was pretty solid at the time. And I ended up finding an advertising agency that was interested in hiring people with different, diverse backgrounds and didn't care about the traditional hierarchical metrics of advertising.
Yeah, I heard a lot of that too. A lot of people like only speak from some small like narrow window of experience from what they've been exposed to. Like they always try to tell you like, no, this is the path. And it's like, if you look around these paths, like that's what I love about advertising. Like it's in production and everything, like everybody's path is like so different. Like some people have skipped a couple steps. Some people have like taken something that seems a little traditional, but there is no set path. But a lot of people, if you really just have to, it comes back to listening to yourself, man. Because if you listen to people, a lot of people only speak from the small window of experience, and the majority of people are not going to really just kind of have the skills to like step outside of their own like one-ism of like thinking like this main character syndrome, like this is the way life is because this is how I see it. People can't see different perspectives.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you meet people. It's like you got to start as a junior copywriter, and then you're a copywriter, and then you're a senior copywriter, and then you're an ACD, and then you're a CD, and then you're an ECD, and then you can be, VP of creative, and then maybe you can be chief creative officer. Or you can just take a bunch of action, collaborate with great people, start your own shop, or go find a small shop where you can just work your ass off and work with people that you love and make great work and crank it out.
Yeah, man, it's just about being like proactive and taking opportunities where you see them. I feel like a lot of people in this industry, like they make it seem like you have to work at a certain place. Like it starts to get political. Like a lot of people, like if you look on LinkedIn and you see a lot of, because you've been talking to a lot of ad creatives, like doing your thing, you see a lot of people like they don't tell you their skills in their little LinkedIn bio. They'll say like X BBDO X. It's like I don't care about what agency you worked at, and it's like I don't necessarily care about your specific portfolio. It's like what are your skill sets? Like what can I learn from you? What value do you bring? And I think a lot of people forget that in this industry specifically, they bank on a name. Like I worked here.
Yeah,
so
I want to see the work, and I want to know who you collaborated with, and I want to know how those relationships went. Like that's like if you can talk to me about how a project went, and you can show the work that you did or that you contributed to, like that's going to be the most important thing. It's actually helped me quite a bit to. Anytime I run into that very hierarchical thinking, I just dispense with it. I'm like, great. That's a guardrail back to what you were saying of like, okay, like I'm actually just not talking to that person anymore. There's no value in that. I'm back. We're just not philosophically aligned enough or practically aligned actually to make it more real. Because I'm trying to collaborate with people to make stuff. I'm not trying to collaborate with people to, strategically map all of my different stops along the way on my career arc.
Yeah, dude. I feel like the hiring process is kind of rough here because of certain criteria people get judged on. So like if you're hiring a creative director, you'll have a bunch of people who are looking at like his portfolio from when he was either a copywriter, an art director, or even a designer, what have you. They're like, the work's not really that conceptual. The work's not this. So he doesn't get hired, but somebody else who has like this fun, stellar work gets hired. But once you're a creative director, like, sure, it's important to know good work and taste levels count to a point, but that's the point where you're like, it's about managing people. So it's like you can have somebody who's a great writer, a great designer, but they can't manage people for shit, and then you can have the inverse. It's tough. I think the hiring process within this industry, people need to shift their perspectives on how they judge people. And
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the things that we bring to the table as military veterans with life experience, and with work experience, and with the diverse set of experiences across both of those things that frankly, college kids just aren't gonna bring to the table, or even people who were traditionally educated and then traditionally came up within the industry aren't going to bring. It's like the leadership that we had to execute as junior enlisted at our level is perfect for advertising. Because in advertising, like, yeah, your creative director, you're going to report to your creative director, but at the end of the day, like, you have to be able to lead up and down the chain of command within the creative organization or within the entire agency organization. And if you don't do that, like, you're toast. Either your ideas aren't going to get chosen, you're not going to get to do the work. Like, it can be healthily competitive on a creative team or within a creative department as you're working, and being a military veteran who's been able to lead up and down chain of command, I think, is an underrated skill set.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I always tell people. Like, it's just a leadership college. That's what 4-year military service for a young person is. It's a leadership college.
Yeah, no doubt. Hold on one second. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
All right, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, my when we started this interview, my computer was at like 30 something percent, and I was like, I can let this ride, and now I watched it go from 10 to 4 really fast. And now everything was like a little bit frozen. So I will welcome everybody back and chop it up. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Like, hold on a second. I can't tell if it's the computer or the internet.
Maybe a little of both.
Oh yeah. Okay. Hold on. Let's give it a second here. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. My internet is not working, and neither is the camera. So let's give it a second here.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Can you hear me in real time easily?
Enough, I can hear you just fine. Yeah.
Okay. It just caught up. So I don't know if it was the power issues. Apologies for those that are listening where it was a little bit, and watching where it's a little bit choppy here. I was having some internet / hardware issues. But yeah, I mean, I think you're you're right. It's a 4-year leadership academy, basically, and I actually think, weirdly enough, being junior enlisted in a lot of ways is better than having been an officer, right? Because as an officer, you're academically taught leadership, right? You're taught principles, and you're taught philosophy, and you're taught application a little bit, right? But as junior enlisted, kind of regardless of what your job is, combat MOS, support MOS, flight line, what have you, like the leadership that you receive and the leadership that you give is leadership that works at the level of actually kicking down the doors, actually turning those wrenches, actually digging those ditches, actually doing whatever it is, the work that needs to be done. I've got a lot of officers that listen to this podcast, and I've got great relationships with them. And I always kind of make fun of them a little bit. But then, we'll talk offline and realize they're like, yeah, I mean, it is kind of true. It's just like mostly academic fluff. Unless you're on a SOF team or infantry or something like that. But some of these other jobs where you're like, man, the officers don't actually do the job that we're doing. Junior enlisted, 4 years, 18 to 22, I mean, is a great crash course in leadership that works.
Yeah,
Or doesn't.
it's like 4 years of film theory and getting a degree in film studies, or working on 2 movie sets. I mean, you're going to learn way more in that 8 weeks of 2 sets than you're going to learn in 4 years. So
that's exactly right. My undergrad was in writing. I got a screenwriting degree. I got a creative writing degree across, multiple outputs, film, comics, novels, all these different things. And then I went and spent time on sets in Los Angeles. And that's where I actually learned the craft of filmmaking. And I was able to then apply the theory and the practice of writing, but I was able to apply it to something real, right? Like when I was first assistant directing, second assistant directing, UPMing features and long form web series, I was like, oh, this is why they say the screenplay is the blueprint for the film or the blueprint for the show or the blueprint for the commercial, because you can't make anything that isn't on this document, and you need this document to reference all the scheduling, to reference all the props, to reference every department, right? And so the marriage of creative and production, on a script document, whether it's commercial or whether it's narrative film or even documentary, like that's where that rubber meets the road, where the boots hit the ground. Like that's the real stuff, and you can only get that through experience. Back to the microcosm of you leaving Creative Circus a year early to go get OJT while you were getting paid a really good salary at PETERMAYER. I think it's great. So I want to wrap things up here in the next couple of minutes. What was it like to get on the job, to get to an advertising agency after a year in college?
Honestly, man, it was like the school prepared me like very well. Learning to like, it's there where I learned, like, because in the circus you're very much like, you have one decision maker, your teacher. Your teacher is the one who's like approving things, telling you how to adjust things. When you get into an actual ad agency, it was like, okay, like I have this creative director who's kind of playing the role my teacher played, but then I have a chief creative officer who also has to, and then I have an account team that also has to put their fingers in the pie. And then it goes to the main people, the client, who we have to convince this is great work and what they need, and then they have to make all their edits. So then you start to see like, oh, because at the circus you're very much like, wow, like I'm gonna get paid to do this. And then when you get out into the real world, it's like there's a portion of it like, I love this shit, like I'm writing, I'm creating, I'm making something. And then there's the other half where you're like, I see why people have to be paid to do this, because this is it is what it is. It's a job.
Yeah. But we're lucky to do it. And it's kind of silly that we get to make things for a living.
I 100% agree with you. I think working in this industry is truly a blessing.
Yeah. I'll never forget the first like big time art director I ever worked with. We were on this like massive, very traditional campaign. We triple bid, 3 really big, really great production companies with celebrity director rosters, and it was $1 million budget, and it was like all this different stuff, and going through creative, went through strategy, we went through creative, we went through bidding, get into pre-pro, we go through pre-pro, everything's great, we get on set. She pulls me aside and she goes, hey, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, everything's great. Why, like, does it seem like am I doing something wrong? Like, what do you need? She goes, this is our first project together. She's like, but I haven't seen you yell at anybody yet. And every agency producer I've ever worked with just like yells at people all the time throughout every step of the process. And I kind of like laughed in her face, not in a mean way, just in like I was like surprised. I said, listen, this is the fun part. Like, this is ridiculous that people are paying $1 million+ for us to travel to a city, show up on a set, take pretty pictures, and choose outfits and props for a product. Like, this is like, we're not getting shot at, we're not getting mortared, we're not in a war zone, we're fucking around and we're getting paid to do it. Like, why would I be yelling at any? None of it is that high stakes. I can't treat any of it that high stakes because it's just straight up not. It's very silly that this is our job. It's amazing that this is our job. And I try to just live in that contradiction as much as I can.
Yeah, dude, that's I try to do that too. I do find myself like you get kind of caught up in the drinking the Kool-Aid and the stress of it, but a lot of times it does just take somebody like you call these meetings and it's like, all right, we have to figure this out, and it's like, can we just relax a little bit because it's a fucking commercial about rice, dude. Like let's just take a step back.
Oh man, that's exactly right. Well, dude, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap things up. I know this won't be the last time we chat, and certainly hope it's not the last time we record an episode. But Joe, where do you want to drive traffic? Where can folks find you? Where can folks find your writing, find your portfolio, or find your work on social or online?
Right now, you can find me on LinkedIn. My website is just joetateswebsite.com. That's Tate. Everybody should check out PETERMAYER's work. I do want to say for any like agency folks listening, don't be afraid to attend any TAPS events, Transition Assistant Program, and let veterans know there are a lot of creative veterans out there. There are a lot of like logistical minded veterans that could do a lot of work within the industry. And if they don't know the industry exists or the opportunities available to them, you're missing out on some great people by not opening up the doors to them more.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, obviously, you and I are biased towards creative and production here because of the pillars that we operate within the industry. But yeah, I mean, there's client services, account stewardship, there's strategy, there's brand strategy, there's content strategy, there's media buying, there's all kinds of different things that military veterans can do and can participate in. It doesn't just have to be, creative. And that's one of my favorite things about our industry is that it's the intersection and the marriage of so many different disciplines, left brain, right brain, up brain, down brain, all the brains kind of coming together to figure out how to make something cool. So I think that's a great point. Cool. Well, to end each episode, I ask an open-ended question. You just sent a call out to the agency side, but for the veteran side, for our community, I ask what's on your heart and what's on your mind for our community right now. It could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate from what we've already talked about today. But Joe, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
Oh, it's a good one, man. Let me try to distill this. There are many things. I mean, honestly, first thing I want to say, as cliche as it might sound, like if you are a veteran and you're struggling with PTSD or anything like that, definitely like do not be afraid to reach out. Like I know there's a lot of like bravado and stuff like that. Still, like even in these progressive times, we still cling to these kind of like macho attitudes of not wanting to get help because, if you want to be successful in life, you have to start with you and moving on. And I know a lot of veterans struggle. And also, like we talked about earlier, always bet on yourself, man. To anybody out there, if you're, kind of struggling to figure out what to do, like a lot of the friends I've talked to, you know what it is you want to do. You know what it is you're capable of doing. So just shut the fuck up and do it. Like you can. Trust me.
Well said. Well said. More people need that advice. I used to be much more in the camp of embracing the choice fatigue and embracing all of your options and opportunities and trying to make the right decision. The right decision is your gut is the smartest organ in your body. Follow your gut and start working, take action, and see where it takes you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
brother.
Harry,
Appreciate you.
having me on, man. Thank you.